What is the state of the Raiders as we're a couple weeks out from the start of training camp? We'll talk about that plus a lot more on Tuesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for July 9th, 2024.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available. As always, if you're checking us out on YouTube, you know we appreciate that. The show grows on the daily, and that's because of the support of Raider Nation and the job my man Ari does on the daily. Does a great job making sure we're on YouTube, we're looking good, and we're sounding good. Definitely appreciate him. We shout him out. He's on Twitter at Ari Produces. I'm on Twitter as well at your boy Q254. You can hit either one of us up. Plus, we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line at 707-654-4693. We'll get back to your calls and texts. Tons of feedback that we got on a bunch of different subjects, from training camp, the excitement of training camp, anticipation of training camp, quarterbacks, and a whole lot more. We'll get as many calls and texts in as possible coming up in segment number 3. Segment number 2, we'll talk about the state of the Raiders as they stand right now, a couple weeks out from training camp. Of course, we'll address it again during training camp as we're able to see how this team starts to get put together, and then where they are coming out of training camp, and they have the 53-man roster. Well, how do we come about that? Well, what are the strengths of the team right now? What is the biggest weakness on the team right now? And where is the biggest improvement on the team? That's all coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Here is segment number 1, news and notes, and really just got a story that I want you to hear from John McClain, the great John McClain, on Kenny the Snake Stabler. We'll do that here in segment number 1 after I tell you about FanDuel. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can make every moment more. As the playoffs, they wound down, they came to a wrap with the finals and the conclusion of the NBA season and the NHL with the Celtics and the Panthers winning. Now we know it's about baseball and the WNBA. This summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I'll tell you more about them after segment number 1 in today's show. But as I mentioned, wanted you to hear a story from the great John McClain, who is a guest on my radio show. Normally, every Tuesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time, he's a guest on my show, but he moved it up to Monday so we could talk about the softball game, or the games that I played in Texas over the weekend on Saturday. He wanted to talk about that. Plus, he's in Houston, so he's got the storms that are going on. Hurricane Beryl was going on, so he canceled his vacation. He was supposed to go on that vacation starting on today, so that's why he was going to do the radio hit on Monday as opposed. But they're going through a lot of stuff when it comes to power in the city of Houston, and over 2 million folks that are affected by that. And he was telling us that him and his family, his wife, are doing great, right? There is no situations there, but a lot of folks there in Houston are definitely affected by that. So we definitely want to send our prayers out to all the people that are affected by that. And as he told me, he'll be happy when November comes. That's when hurricane season is over. So definitely sending our prayers out to the folks in Houston. But over the weekend, he was telling me how he had so many stories about the Raiders, you know, from Kenny Stabler to Dave Casper and a whole lot more, as he's been covering the league for so long. Al Davis never had a problem talking with him because he loved the AFL. So he wanted to make sure he came on and told some stories. And I thought Monday was the perfect day, since that was the same day in 2015 that Kenny Stabler passed. He actually was born December 25th, 1945, and passed away on July 8th, 2015. He played for the Raiders, Oilers, and the Saints in the NFL, and unfortunately was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2016, which is clearly a year after he passed, and that's unfortunate. John McClain, who is a Hall of Fame voter, he's in the Hall of Fame himself. You'll hear him in this conversation that you'll hear in just a couple seconds talk about how he was so upset that the Snake didn't get in until after he passed away, and the voters didn't get him in on time. But he did have a couple good stories about Kenny the Snake Stabler that he could tell on the radio that were radio friendly. So enjoy it. It's about 6 minutes long, but really good stuff. When the general talks, I like to listen. So here's John McClain from my radio show on Monday talking about the late, great Kenny the Snake Stabler. July 8th, 2015, that's when Kenny the Snake Stabler, he died. I know that you covered the Snake for a very long time. You've got plenty of Snake stories. Anything you could tell us about the Snake, radio friendly, that you could tell us about the Snake?
Well, I might have to think long and hard on that one. No, I do have some. It was still the biggest trade in NFL history for one star quarterback and another. Kenny Stabler was Super Bowl winner from the Raiders, who had fallen out of favor with Al Davis. And Dan Pastorini for the Oilers, who'd been third overall pick in 71, had led the Oilers 2 years in a row during the Love You Blue era, one step short of the Super Bowl, and lost both the AFC Championship games at Pittsburgh, and which at the time I thought was the greatest dynasty I'd seen. So it was the height of Love You Blue. It was the movie Urban Cowboy. Cowboys were in. And with Bum Phillips, the head coach, and his big cowboy hat that he wore everywhere, Snake came into town with Snake boots, Snake cowboy hat, Snake everything. He was the perfect fit. Houston Chronicle had a great picture of Bum and Snake with their boots up on the bumper of Snake's Bronco with the snakes on the side, and they just went together like bacon and eggs. And he was great. He was fun. I never had any issues with him, like some media people had in when he was in Oakland. And I loved covering that first training camp. We were out in San Angelo, Texas, which is kind of a cowboy town anyway, and everybody wanted to see Snake. And I've told this story a million times that season. I got to tell it again because it's such a great story. One day, they were always worried about Kenny. Get an irate husband, missing a game, getting hurt, staying out late, drinking too much. That great quote, I read the game plan by the light of the jukebox. And so he didn't show up one day at practice, and everybody, so they start calling the hospitals, the police. He hadn't called in. There was no excuse, unexcused absence. Everybody was in a panic because it was the Snake. And so next day he shows up. He's at practice. Afterward, the media, we go running over to him. And after he'd take a shower, he'd sit on a chair in front of his locker. He was always naked. And he had his left leg over his right knee smoking a cigarette. So we got used to him being naked, and so we're crowding around him. Snake, what happened to you? Where were you yesterday? And he takes a puff of his cigarette, and he says, yesterday was Veterans Day. I'm a veteran, so I took the day off. And Bum Phillips, who was fining him, thought that was such a good excuse. He rescinded the fine. And my favorite story about a game was they played at Shea Stadium against the Jets, and they stayed in New Jersey because Bum Phillips didn't want Kenny downtown in Manhattan partying everywhere. So they stayed in New Jersey, and he told their middle linebacker, Captain Greg Bingham, you go wherever Snake goes, and you make sure he's back here by midnight. And the curfew was 11, but they were going to give him an hour. So they went downtown, and Richard Todd, former Alabama quarterback, who had come up behind him, was injured and not playing. And so they started partying, going from club to club. Finally, it was time to go. Bingham told him, Snake, we got to go. Nah, you go, Bing. I'll be on later. Well, it's deadline. Don't worry about it, Bing. I don't want to get in trouble. Okay, I'll handle it. So Bingham came back next morning. They get up. They have their team meal. Kenny's not there, not in his run. Then they get ready to go, and the trainer comes up and says, Stabler just got here in a cab, almost fell in the street. He looks really bad. Snake goes in, he gets his gear, he goes to the stadium before the game. He's in, Bum Phillips is giving a pregame speech, and you hear this Snake throwing up. And so he throws, I think, 5 interceptions in the first half, and they're thinking, should they bench him? Halftime, Bum's making a come-from-behind speech, throwing up some more. Then he comes out, wiping his face with a towel, tosses it to Bum, says, I'm ready to go, throws 5 touchdown passes, ties the game, goes into overtime, and they lose on a Pat Leahy field goal. That was the kind of times, wild and crazy, that you had covering Kenny Stabler. And then when they ironically, they went 11-5, they go to Oakland, where he'd been traded from. They acquired Dave Casper at the trade deadline to give Earl Campbell 2 ways to run with tight ends, right or left. And Stabler and Casper, of course, one of the greatest pass-catch combinations in history. So they go out to Oakland. Snake had a terrible game, threw a bunch of interceptions. They lose to the Raiders. Raiders went on to win this Super Bowl, and he held out the next year, really, because he didn't want to come to camp. He didn't like the coach who replaced the fired Phillips, stayed there 2 years, then went to New Orleans where Bum was playing. And at that time, he told me a quote. He said he was 38, I believe. And he said George Blanda told him when he was a rookie with the Raiders, and at the time, he was so far down the depth chart, he left and went to live in a hippie commune. Then he was on what at the time was called the taxi squad, like the practice squad. He was going to quit and go back to Alabama. And George Blanda told him, he said, Rook, he said, let me tell you something. All this time you're not playing early in your career, you're not getting beat up. It'll add time onto the end of your career when you're making a lot of money. And Kenny told me that one time, said at the point he was making like $300,000, which was a lot of money then. And thanks to the wise words of George Blanda, another Hall of Fame quarterback. People miss Snake so much because he's such a character, and I'm just as someone who's been on the Hall of Fame selection committee for 31 years, I felt terrible that we didn't put him in the Hall of Fame when he was alive.
You could hear it in John's voice as he closed that out right there, talking about the disappointment and how upset he was that him and his other voters there for the Hall of Fame did not get the Snake in before he passed away. Obviously, that happened with Cliff Branch as well. That's very unfortunate. I really hope they get Lester Hayes in before he passes away. All our heroes, right? All the Raiders of old are passing away because they're getting old, right? I mean, it's just natural. That's how life goes. And so I hate to see when any player gets into the Hall or gets some kind of big honor after they pass away. Love to be able to let these players get their flowers while they're still alive. And unfortunately for Kenny Stabler, he was not able to get that. And Cliff Branch the same. Really wish those guys had been able to be alive and get into the Hall of Fame. We know how much it would have meant to both those players, but it did not happen for the Snake, did not happen for Cliff Branch. Hopefully Lester Hayes is able to get in there before he passes away. And, because again, it's just something that happens in life. Coming up in segment number 2, State of the Team. We'll talk about the strength, the weakness, and the biggest area of improvement. I'll explain that all in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get to that, though, I'll tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is FanDuel. And as you know, I love sports. Hell, I flew to Texas just to play some sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. Whenever I'm in Studio Q, I've got ESPN on. Whenever I'm off and not doing anything, guess what I'm watching? Some sporting event, mainly on ESPN, but there's so much sports to enjoy. That's what I do. So the sports aren't quite where they are right now because the NBA is done. Obviously, NHL is done as well. I'm glad USA basketball is going on. The WNBA has had my full attention, no doubt about that. Major League Baseball is some young, really good talent that I've been checking out. The All-Star break's coming up, so excited about that. I'll really lock in and start focusing on the daily on baseball because, well, those are the boys of summer. Not to mention, I'll be focusing on what FanDuel's got. They let me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I got to do is open the app, dream up any bet, anytime I'm in the mood. This summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So you can do like I do. Head over to FanDuel.com. Start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. As we are a couple weeks out from the start of training camp, this is something that I started doing on my radio show, Unnecessary Roughness, on Raider Nation Radio 920 on Monday, is going through the state of teams. And what I mean by that is the teams that are on the Raiders schedule. So I did the Chargers on Monday, went through their strength, their weakness, and where their biggest area of improvement is. But I also started on Monday with the state of the Raiders. We got to focus on the Raiders before we can focus on the opponents that they're going to be playing in 2024, right? So we started off with the Raiders, and that's the 3 questions. I think that can teach you a lot, and you can learn a lot about a team just by asking these 3 simple questions. Where's the strength of the team? Where's the weakness of the team? And where's the biggest improvement? So I think it's a no-brainer what the strength of the Raiders team is. And this is the funny thing, because as we discussed it on my radio show on Monday, you could say the defense is a strength. And there's no doubt about that. Or you could be more specific and say the Raiders defensive line is a strength, especially with the addition of Christian Wilkins and what he brings to the table. I mean, he's a big monster. He should make everyone's life that much easier, from Max Crosby, to Malcolm Kuntz, to Tyree Wilson, the second-year guy out of Texas Tech, Adam Butler, John Jenkins. Like, that is a huge strength of the team, the defensive line. But I like to look at it and say, okay, the defense in general is going to be the Raiders' strength, and they're going to be the reason why they're in just about every single game throughout the course of the year. As far as I'm concerned, they'll be in every game. I don't think you'll see a game where we come back and talk about it and say, man, what happened in that game? How the hell did they get blown out? Why was there no effort? Like, I just don't think that that's going to be something that we see and we hear and we talk about in 2024. Of course, I can always be wrong. I've been wrong a million times. I'll be wrong a million more times. I'm okay with that. But just my gut feeling tells me that that is going to be the reason why you don't see that. I don't think those dudes on that side of the ball, the defensive side of the ball, are going to allow that team to fall into that kind of a trap where they just look unprepared, unmotivated, right? Even the game when they lost coming out of the bye week in 2023 against the Vikings 3-0, the defense still played their tail off. They didn't allow the Vikings a touchdown. They only allowed them a field goal, right? The biggest problem was the Raiders' offense couldn't do squat. When they got into the red zone, they turned the ball over, and that was the only opportunity that they really had to score in that game. So it wasn't the fact that the team looked unprepared or just didn't put the effort in there. It's just the offense couldn't execute. But the defense definitely kept them in the game, as the Vikings defense kept them in the game as well, holding the Raiders to 0 points. So I think the strength of the team, no doubt about it, is going to be the Raiders defense. Again, I don't think that that's going out on a limb. I don't think that's a hot take at all. That's the no-brainer. And you can even double down and say that the defensive line, to be more specific, will be the biggest strength. Now, with the weakness, it's funny, we actually had a couple different opinions on the weakness, and this is where it got interesting because I kind of thought that this was a no-brainer. Again, the weakness was going to be the offense, right? I mean, and if you want to be specific, like I was specific with the defensive line, you could say the quarterback position because it's just an unknown, and that's where the big competition is going to come in when training camp opens up, when Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew are battling out to be who's the starting quarterback. So I thought, okay, the offense is going to be what Raider Nation says is the weakness of the team. But I ended up having a few different answers that I found to be pretty specific. One was the cornerback room, and I didn't look at it. It's funny, I didn't look at the cornerback room as a weakness. I just looked at it as, okay, there's a question mark who's going to be across from Jack Jones and Nate Hobbs. So I guess if you want to call that a weakness, you can call it a weakness, but I kind of looked at it more as just not knowing. But it was funny when I had Vic Tafer on my show talking about it. He said, well, I could look at it as an unknown or a weakness in the cornerback room, only because as much as we're all anticipating Jack Jones being that guy, and I do believe he's going to be that guy along with Nate Hobbs, the truth of the matter is we haven't seen him play a full season yet in his NFL career. And most of that's due to injury. A little bit of that's been due to suspension. And we only saw him in a Raiders uniform for a short sample size, a small sample size last year after they picked him up off a waiver. So can he put together that for a full season? Now, I fully believe in Jack Jones. I don't want to make it sound like I'm doubting what he can do, but I mean, the reality of it is, and that's why we have people on the show to talk and give their opinions, and that's why I like to hear from Raider Nation and obviously folks that cover the team as well, is that the reality is we haven't seen Jack Jones for a full season. So I think that he's going to be a really good one as far as the cornerback room goes, but he very well could be a number two. And so if Jacorian Bennett doesn't step up and play that role, and Brandon Faison step up or play that role, or maybe a MJ Devonshire doesn't step up and play that role, or a DeCam Richardson who they picked up, or they don't sign a veteran, which Vic Tafer thinks that there's still a veteran out there that they may sign right around training camp or once training camp opens up, maybe that does turn into a weakness. Again, I don't look at it as that. I just think that it's a question mark just with that other position, because I think Jack Jones and Nate Hobbs are going to do a hell of a job. But I can understand that argument. Then I also heard, the offensive line, because there's new pieces and new parts there, from the left guard, who we believe will be JPJ, Jackson Powers Johnson, to, the right tackle. Even if Thayer Munford gets that job, he hasn't been a full-time right tackle, so it's going to take a while for them to gel. So we could be more specific and say not only is the weakness the offense, but even the offensive line. But, so there's a couple different, I guess, arguments or conversations that could be had on what you consider the Raiders' weakness. And then the biggest improvement, which is funny, I actually had a problem coming up with what the biggest improvement was. And I really started to think that their strength which is the Raiders defense and the Raiders defensive line, also was the biggest improvement because of the addition of Christian Wilkins. Sometimes it's okay to strengthen and improve your strength already, right? And that's what the Raiders have with the defensive line and the addition of Christian Wilkins. So as I mentioned, Max Crosby's job's easier. Malcolm Kuntz's job is easier. Tyree Wilson's job is easier because of the addition of Christian Wilkins and what he's going to be able to bring to the table. And then someone suggested, how about their leadership and their coaching? That's the biggest improvement from what they had last year. And I think that was the best answer. I really think that was the best answer in general. I remember this time of year last year. I remember Josh McDaniels trying to go into year 2 of training camp and year 2 of being the head coach of the team. Obviously, there's a lot of questions. And funny, because we were on this very show talking about, well, if the Raiders don't succeed in 2023, who's going to be the fall guy? The defensive coordinator, Patrick Graham. Like, that was my words. My conversation. Oh, yeah, he's going to end up being the guy that takes the hit, and Josh McDaniels is going to stick around, where in the long run, what ends up happening is the defense is the strength of the team. Patrick Graham looks like a hero, and Antonio Pierce goes from being a linebacker coach to the head coaching position. But going back to the culture that Antonio Pierce has talked about a lot, the leadership, the way that the players want to run through a wall for this guy, that does seem like the biggest improvement. So you can look at the Raiders and their coaching staff. And, again, I can even expand it to the whole staff and not just AP. I mean, man, they have 29 coaches. I don't know if they need necessarily 29 coaches on the staff, but from the guys that AP hired, from young guys to the older guys with plenty of experience, former head coaches like a Marvin Harrison and a Joe Philbin to be a part of his staff. And obviously Tom Coughlin, a guy that he can lean on and bounce ideas off, to young guys, right? Like Ricky Manning Jr., who's the cornerbacks coach, and, other guys that are, Alexander, who is the safeties coach, and, guys like that. And just, it's a variety of experience as far as the coaching staff goes. It's a variety of energies, different energies that matches with the room. If it's the cornerbacks, the safeties, the linebackers, the Raiders defensive line, Rob Leonard. I'm a big Rob Leonard coaching fan. I really like Rob Leonard as the D-line coach. I think he's a guy you'll see sooner rather than later having a defensive coordinator position in the National Football League. If it's not with the Raiders, I can see that. I just feel like that those coaches match their position group. So, when that suggestion came through that probably the biggest improvement is the leadership, I think that was hitting it right on the head. I think that was a home run, and it's probably not even close. So as much as we can say, and I think that you can have an argument about the biggest strength of the Raiders also was their biggest improvement when it came to the Raiders defensive line and the addition of Christian Wilkins. I think the overwhelming biggest improvement is the one that's going to matter and also help the Raiders be a competitive team in 2024. Whereas I mentioned before, you're not going to see a team that's not prepared, a team that looks like that they're just lost or they're getting blown out. I think that's going to have to come down from the head coach, AP, the guy that's going to get everyone motivated, fired up, and ready to rock and roll. So I feel like that is the biggest improvement, the leadership and the coaching of the Silver and Black. The strength, the defense, and more specifically the defensive line. The weakness, potentially the cornerback room and the hole that's on the opposite of Jack Jones. And then the offensive line could be considered a weakness, and just the offense in general with the big unknown installing a new offense under Luke Getsy. Can Luke Getsy be that offensive coordinator that he needs to be, where he's able to put the weapons in place, the people in place, the personnel in place, to be able to succeed in 2024? And the biggest improvement, the Raiders coaching staff and their leadership. But what do you think the strength, the weakness, and the biggest improvement is? 707-654-4693. Your calls and texts are coming up in segment number 3 on today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. We'll start off with a text from Guareb. Says, Q, it's astonishing how low the IQ of Raider fans are when it comes to QBs. They allow their feelings to dominate over talent. The black athletic quarterbacks are succeeding in the draft on the field and by sports media over the stiff white quarterbacks in today's NFL outside of Burrow, Herbert, and Allen. None of the other younger quarterbacks are winning. This has nothing to do with race. It's just facts. That's from Guareb. Thanks for the text. I do appreciate you. And I understand what you're saying, but the way that you worded it makes it absolutely sound like it has everything to do with race. And I'm not a guy that cares what you look like. I don't. I can give a rip what you look like. That goes for my friends. That goes for my family. That goes from the quarterback of my favorite team. I don't care what you look like. That makes me no difference whatsoever. It just so happens, and people called me out for this during the draft process, that why is Jalen Hurts? Why is Jaden Daniels? Why is Michael Penix? Why are those the quarterbacks you like as opposed to a Drake May or a J.J. McCarthy? Or even before that, like a Will Levis? Has nothing to do with race. It was just my preference. I think the more important thing, as opposed to the color of the quarterback, is the fact that you're looking for a quarterback, in my opinion, that has athleticism, a guy who is athletic, a guy who can get out of harm's way, a guy who can keep plays alive, a guy who can go pick up a first down or two with his legs, but also can win with his arm. So I don't think that's specific to a black guy or a white guy. I think that just is specific to a certain type of quarterback. I think that's the best way of wording what you're trying to word. I don't think you're trying to be racial about it, but the way you worded it is definitely sounds like you're trying to be racial about it. Drake May has an opportunity to thrive. Bo Nix, J.J. McCarthy, those guys haven't even got a chance to get on the field yet. So we don't know if they're going to be good or not, right? Trevor Lawrence just signed a massive contract in Jacksonville. I get it. He doesn't have a winning record, but I think anybody in Raider Nation would take Trevor Lawrence as their quarterback. I think we all know that Trevor Lawrence has ability. Now, he's in a bad position where he needs to win, especially after getting that big contract. But I think we all realize he's a really good quarterback. How about Brock Purdy? He's a winner in San Francisco, right? He's going to get a fat contract extension sooner rather than later, right after this year. He's going to get paid. Will Levis in Tennessee, he's got an opportunity. You mentioned Burrow, you mentioned Herbert, you mentioned Allen. I bring these guys up only to let you know that it doesn't really matter about the race of the quarterback. It just matters about the abilities of the quarterback. That's what I like to focus in on. That's what I will focus in on. I think that's where you're going, but I think it's kind of like, the execution of plays sometime. Like in your mind, the execution, the play is way it's supposed to shake out, and then the execution is not right. I think that's how it went with that text. But thanks anyway. I do appreciate you. So again, quarterbacks with athleticism is what I'm looking for. They're guys that can win with their arms as well. Up next, got a call from Jordan in Oregon. He's calling to talk about the Raiders and his excitement level and why it's at an all-time high right now, especially compared to it was this time last year. Here's Jordan in Oregon. Thanks for the call.
Hey, what's going on, Q? Jordan from Oregon. Wanted to call in, chime in on your podcast. Love the Monday edition. Just also had a few notes and things I took away from that I wanted to bring up. Really excited for the first time in a while for myself. This real, little kid giddy excitement about the Raiders is back. I'll be honest. I've been calling your show since you've been doing the thing, 2019, I believe. And around that timing, my excitement level for the Raiders was at all-time high with everything that was going on, the picks we had. Felt good about the quarterback position. And last year, I would say, is kind of the opposite of that, going into the beginning of the season, the training camp. And, it kind of started for me with just the Garoppolo signing. Was never a fan of it. Tried to get on board with it like I always do. And just, until we see it, you kind of have to get on board. But, his injury situation set him back. Even training camp, he wasn't getting as many reps and just wasn't really a good report coming out of the Josh McDaniels training camp, it seemed like last year. And brings me to my point is that, I had some time off, been watching a lot of, the end of the season for me with the 2023 Raiders. And I'll just try to bang this point out as quick as I can. There's just so much growth from Aiden O'Connell down the stretch. In those last, let's even just call it quarter of the season, the guy played really well, and he played some good football, and I felt like some of it slid under the rug a little bit for myself because I was so focused in on them trying to still snag a wild card and get in the mix. I kind of just lost touch with the details of the season. But, man, looking back down the stretch, Q, you talked about some things he's got to be able to do, escapability or extend the play. And I got to say, the last couple games, I thought even the Denver game, they did a good job of right off the bat rolling him out to his right and had some nice completions to Mayer. Jacoby had a couple touchdowns in that last game, and just down the stretch, some really good football. So I'm excited to see the growth. And that's one thing I guess I just want to hang my hat on this point, is that with Aiden O'Connell, there was growth down the stretch that I'm pretty excited about. And in terms of comparing him to Gardner Minshew, I don't know that Gardner ever has had that type of growth. He's always came in and been a relatively, average quarterback, a great backup. But I feel like I know what Gardner Minshew is a lot better than AOC. And with Aiden, I feel like there was a lot of growth down the stretch. And I mean, just to add a little bit more to the mobility on that, I could see some really good things happening. And I'm excited about the season. Peace out.
Jordan, appreciate you as always, brother. It was really fun. It is really fun, exciting time right now. I've said it a bunch. I think this team is going to surprise a lot of folks. They might not see and expect the Raiders to jump up and bite them like I think that they can this year. Obviously, they've got to get good, consistent quarterback play, and I think that that's possible. Look, this time last year, nobody was thinking that the Texans were going to be a very good team. Nobody thought C.J. Stroud was even the guy. Everyone put all the eggs in the Bryce Young basket. And Bryce Young still has a chance to be a good quarterback, but he wasn't his rookie year, right? He just wasn't. A lot of that was Carolina's fault. They didn't have any line. They didn't have any kind of weapons for him to throw the ball to. So he has an opportunity to bounce back. I like Bryce Young a lot, but C.J. Stroud and the Texans, they were the ones that really shined, right, in his rookie year and DeMeco Ryans' first year as the head coach. The Raiders had that same opportunity. I know that AP has coached at the end of the season in 2023, so people know what he's capable of. But even myself, I've always been the guy that says, no, don't hire the interim head coach. I wanted them to hire AP because I felt like he was the right guy for the job. So I think that he's going to have an opportunity to lead this team, and they're going to jump up and surprise some folks, just similar to what Houston did last year. Not a lot of people believed that they were going to be good. Even the folks in Houston, they were disappointed that they got C.J. Stroud. They were mad that they ended up with the number 2 overall pick as opposed to number 1. They all wanted Bryce Young and got lucky that they got C.J. Stroud. So, O'Connell, he has a chance to prove who he is, what he's capable of. The only thing he doesn't have, going back to Guareb's text, he just doesn't have that athleticism. He can do it with his arm. He can do it between his ears. He's got the brains to get it done, right? He's a smart dude, but he just doesn't have that athletic skill set. That's the only thing that's going to hold him back, and that's where Gardner Minshew has the advantage over him in training camp, because he does have enough wiggle to get out of there and keep plays alive and do what I'm looking for. Pick up a first down here and there, right? Roll the pocket, do a few other things. I think that that's where Minshew has the advantage over O'Connell, but I do think O'Connell is a leader in the clubhouse right now as it stands for the starting job. But he's going to have to go out there and prove it. But I'm like you, man. I'm pretty excited about what this season could bring and what this team could look like, and I'm trying to temper my expectations, at least until training camp, and I could actually start to see it out there on the field. But the good thing is it's only a couple of weeks away. So, Jordan, thanks for the call. As always, my man, definitely appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Just Win Will out to 816. He says, Q, got a question and possibly a show topic for you. Would you do a deep dive into the difference between power blocking scheme and zone blocking and what that means for our offensive line? Do we have the players needed currently? Is it a tough transition going from one scheme to the other? What other offensive positions will either benefit or potentially be hurt by the switch? Basically, an all things O-line episode. Thanks, Q, for everything you do for the nation. Just Win Will out. Raiders. That's Just Win Will. Thanks for the text. Appreciate it. And yeah, we could definitely do that. Matter of fact, I like to, bring folks on that are experts in certain categories so I can do that. And the thing about it is the power blocking scheme, that's what I prefer. Just most teams don't run that anymore because you can't really practice it, right? That's something that Lincoln Kennedy told me a long time ago, that you can't really practice the power blocking scheme anymore because of the current CBA. So it doesn't really allow. But when it comes to the zone blocking scheme, there's so many different variations and there's so many different ways that these different coaches coach it up. Like Coach Craig is the coach for the offensive line coach for the Raiders. He comes over from the 49ers. So what the 49ers run as far as their offensive line and their running scheme is different than what other teams run. So more specifically, not only will we get someone on to talk about the zone blocking scheme for the offensive line point of view, but more importantly, what it is that San Francisco did and how they ran it, because that's what you're going to see more than anything from the Raiders in 2024 with Coach Craig as the offensive line coach there. So, yeah, we'll really make sure that happens. That's a good suggestion. Thanks so much. And a perfect time, a couple weeks out from training camp, right? So it's something that you can focus in on and understand what you're looking at when you see him in the preseason and you see him early in the season. Again, thanks so much for that text. Do appreciate you. Up next, got a call from Tadreese in New Jersey. He's calling to tell us a story about Al Davis that he thinks we'll get a good kick out of. Here he is, Tadreese in New Jersey.
What's up, Q? It's Tadreese from New Jersey. I got a cool Al Davis story for you that I've been holding on to because you were on vacation, and then last week you were playing, Al Davis stuff, and I thought you would really enjoy this story. So I'm working on this job site, and I get a new partner who says that he's worked in California, and he sees my water bottle that has Raiders on it, and he's like, "Oh, you a Raiders fan?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm a 49ers fan." And a buddy of mine is good friends with Al Davis' son, and in the early 2000s, he invites me to a game, and we go up to the press box, and I'm all 49ers out, and who is in the press box? None other than Al Davis himself. He's sitting in a wheelchair because he had hurt his leg or something, and he turns around and says, "Who the blankety blank let this guy in here? Get him out of here." Kicked him out immediately. Sent him to the next press box where he was like all by himself, right? Raiders fans, all in the press box. And he said he couldn't remember the year. He couldn't remember the quarterback because he thinks our starter was out. So I did some research for my boy Q. It looks like it was the 2006 game, and Andrew Walters was the quarterback. He threw a touchdown to Randy Moss, okay? So the Raiders get off to like a 7-3 lead. Second quarter, I think the Raiders scored, but it was all 49ers the second half. So whoever his buddy was that invited him to the press box, he joins him in the second half. He says, "What are you doing in here?" He says, Al kicked me out as well. Yo, Q, once again, man, Tadreese from New Jersey. Thanks for all you do. And I wanted to hear from you one last thing, if you could squeeze this in. 40-20. I love hearing you talk about that, and you think our defense can get 40-20. You know what that means, sacks and interceptions. Just win, baby. Have a great day.
Tadreese, thanks so much for the call. It's a fantastic story. Wild story. I can't imagine sitting in the press box in Allegiant Stadium and seeing someone come rolling through in all 49er gear. I can't picture someone rolling through in all Raider gear unless they work for the team. You know, that's one of those no-nos, right? One of those rules that you just can't do in any press box. I remember the first time that I went to the Houston Texans game. I remember John McClain, hooked me up with the head PR person that approved my credential. And he said, now, first thing, Q, I got to tell you, man, I know you're a Raider fan. Don't come to the game with the Raider jersey on, this, that, and the other, which obviously I wasn't going to do that. But, I mean, he didn't know because he put his name on the line to make sure I was able to get that credential to go to the Texans game. That was the Texans and Raiders. Was it the playoff game? It might have been. The first one might have been the playoff game that they went to and lost in 2016. I think it was. But I was like, nah, man, I'm definitely not going to do that. You know me better than that. And so that's a hell of a story. And especially to go into the press box, Raiders press box, and see Al Davis sitting there and you're wearing all 49er gear. Yeah, I could imagine what that was like. As far as your 40-20, that was something that I talked about quite a bit. If you don't know what Tadreese is talking about, 40 sacks and 20 interceptions. And yeah, I definitely believe the Raiders can do that. Their defense could do that this year. I mean, if you go back and look at last year, they had 46 sacks in 2023, obviously led by the 14.5 by Max Crosby, and they had 13 interceptions. But they did have 9 fumble recoveries, so that is over 20 takeaways. It wasn't 20 interceptions, but it was over 20 takeaways. I think that they can get 20 interceptions. I don't think that that's an unrealistic number. Again, that's a number that Eric Allen told me when he was playing for the Raiders. That was the number of interceptions that they were always gunning for. That was when Willie Shaw was the defensive coordinator, and that was their number. 20 interceptions is what they were gunning for, and everyone went out of their way to try to get as many as possible to try to hit that 20 number. They got 13 in 2023. I think in 2024 they can do even better than that, especially with that defensive line being nasty like I believe they're going to be. But yeah, 46 sacks, they should be able to get over 50 sacks. But I think that 40-20 is a great number. It's a great goal, right? I'm looking at Max Crosby to have, above 15 sacks. I'm looking for Malcolm Kuntz to have double-digit sacks. I'd like to see Tyree Wilson get, close to double digits. And who knows what Christian Wilkins is going to be able to add. And that has nothing to do with corner blitzes, linebackers coming, anyone else that's getting, safety blitzes. Those guys could pick up a couple sacks here and there. I think the Raiders should really be pushing 50 sacks in 2024, if not more, because that defensive line, as I keep calling them, are bloodthirsty Pirates, and they're going to be looking for the blood. They're thirsty. They're Pirates in 2024. Thanks so much for the call, my man. Great story as well, and I do appreciate you. Finally, we close out from a text from Major Andrew D. Bressler from the U.S. Army. He said, bottom line up front, at no cost or risk to the Raiders, I got a quarterback that plays like Mike Vick and Lamar Jackson. If not quarterback, he's willing to play any position that helps improve the team and is ready and willing to prove himself at the Raiders training camp at the Jack Hammett Sports Complex in Costa Mesa, California. If you like what you see, we're asking the team to give him a spot on the practice squad. If you don't, no harm, no loss to the Raiders. I believe his life story, personality, and drive for success as an individual and team member will pay dividends to the Raiders family, as he is a force multiplier for any team he serves. I humbly ask you to give him a chance. If he does not make the team, at least he can move forward in life, knowing after all the turmoil he grew up with as a ward of the state of Hawaii, in and out of foster care homes growing up, and the opportunities he lost, he got his shot and could live knowing he had his chance at the end of the day. That's Major Andrew Bressler from the U.S. Army. Couple things. First of all, thanks for the text. I appreciate you. Thank you for your service as well. Definitely appreciate that. I mention that all the time as much as possible, that we appreciate everyone who, fights for our freedom, continues to hold it down for our freedoms, and has in the past, and even ones that have lost their lives battling for our freedoms. I definitely appreciate that. But a couple things when it comes to this quarterback. One, you didn't tell us who it is at all, so I don't know who it is, and maybe you forgot, or maybe you're going to put that in the story later. I'm not too sure. And second, it ain't up to me. I have no say on anything that the Raiders do. I don't work for the Raiders. I'm not able to receive a check for the Raiders, so my suggestion box is not a suggestion box that they check at all. So I am not the right guy. You'd have to reach out to the actual Raiders organization if you wanted to do that. But yeah, I don't have anything to do with that. But it sounds like, at least a story I'd like to look into and maybe even go back and watch some films. So hit me back and let me know at least who the player is, and maybe we could talk about him. Maybe we can get him on and do an interview. I wouldn't mind doing that. But I don't think that, that's going to help him get a spot at training camp, as he'd have to be a part of the 90-man roster. So yeah, that's probably all I really got for you. But, if there's anything, I would go to the Raiders website, Raiders.com, look up the PR guy, maybe Will Kiss. I'll just go ahead and throw that name out there to you. He's a good dude. Look up his email maybe and shoot him an email, and maybe he can help you out. But really, outside of that, there's nothing that I can do. But like I said, let us know who the quarterback is, his name, his story. Again, if I could do an interview with him, maybe get his name out there, his story out there, that'd be cool. I can do that to help out. But that's all I really got. But again, Major Andrew D. Bressler from the U.S. Army, thank you again for your service, and I definitely appreciate your text as well. That's all I got time for on today's show. Continue to bring me that feedback, calls and texts, 707-654-4693. Again, in segment number 2, we talked about the state of the team, which is strength, weakness, biggest improvement. Let me know what you think that is. Coming up tomorrow, I'll definitely have more news and notes. We'll have plenty of conversation, feedback from the state of the team, your thoughts, and a whole lot more. We'll do that on Wednesday's edition as we start to fly through another week just like that of here on the Locked On Raiders podcast. So until then, Raider Nation, as always, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.